I usually start pretty intuitively, where I just have a few ideas I start with for paintings, and then they branch out, and usually I find the overall meaning of the show toward the end, and that's where I find the title. But for this one, it was more midway. I had already worked on a lot of opposing ideas and diptychs. My husband was reading a book about archetypes of numbers, and I realized I hadn't touched number one really properly. And they had all kind of geometrical assignment in that book. And I started kind of toying with that. That's how the Vesica painting here came about. So that's where I started to really work toward the end of my show on tondo-shaped paintings, on circular paintings, thinking of the number one and thinking of all the implications. So that's where the monad part came in, really. What has prompted this thought too is just the observation that during quarantine, we were all living in our little bubbles. We were all kind of working as singular units, separated from one another. And the last painting was this one, the Futur, inspired by the Seurat painting. You can see in that painting all the theme of the show are kind of coming into one, because you have nonetheless the split, and you have the idea of dyad within the monads. Initially, with my show at White Cube, I already, I think, was in the process of transitioning. I already wanted to, as it were, like kind of zoom out a little bit of the image, because I've been, in my past body of work, I've been so close to the subject and cropping out a lot outside of the image on purpose, and working more on female archetypes and creating a real sense of intimacy. Before the quarantine, or before the lockdown and the pandemic happened, I was already thinking of how do I do that, and thinking more of the individual versus the collective a little more. I worked more on the individual level, and I wanted to work more on the collective or society and balance those two notions. And I think that's where the cold room paintings really, that's what they were addressing, a little bit of the systems, you know, and the larger scale of something done systematically. The cold rooms are talking about the meat industry, but also they're extremely clean and sterile and sanitized and controlled. So it's a bit like kind of the opposite of the image we have of the meat industry. I think that's where there's something cinematic about my work, because of the work on the frame, really, and the narrative. So we're, you know, placed again in the movie world, where it's you have a sense of space and time. And for the cell painting, it's actually tying back with an older practice of mine that I had when I was 20 years old. I made a lot of paintings seen from my point of view, or like from top, like above my head. And strangely, suddenly I had this desire to like loop back with those works. And I think I'm actually gonna keep developing that. I was just really playing with angles and unusual angles and uncomfortable angles as well. The work on paper, the squash on paper, that's a series that really gave birth to my whole body of work for the past 5 years or 6 years. But then, you know, eventually I just, by accident, I made something black and white for another project, and I realized I really liked how it looked. And then I wanted to create a body of work in black and white, but I just didn't know how to go about it, because when you remove the color element of the composition, then you have to readjust everything, the light and the placement and the psychology even of the image, because you have to approach them from a different angle. And I realized I need to stop thinking about color. I just need to think about the objects I was describing in a 3D, more sculptural way, thinking about where we're going as a society, with especially the events of the last year, and, you know, thinking of surveillance and cameras and new technologies. They're all related to the act of seeing and being seen. I really want to tie a lot of links between we've been used to see or look at or in the past, and that's in painting history, and tying that to now the cameras and omnipresence of cameras in our lives and as medias between human beings, cameras and as moderators. So that I think the next works are going to be about the constant shift of perspective